This really happened to me, and I'm telling it the way it unfolded, with the heat still in my chest. It's not a parable or a made-up email chain. This is my life. My mother held my blue passport over the sink like a hostage at a ransom exchange while the faucet hissed and pinged against the stainless steel. We were in her narrow kitchen in Tacoma, the one with the sun-faded rooster tiles, and she said softly, "If you leave, you'll lose everything." My suitcase leaned against the back door like an accomplice, and the keys to her house pressed into my palm, biting crescents into my skin. My humiliation came quick and bright. She'd taken something of mine, of my name and movement and proof, because she wanted me to stay her daughter, the obedient one, forever. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. I was 58 then, old enough to know what I could survive and what I couldn't. Divorce had stripped me down to bone and salt, and my studio lease in Seattle had done the rest. When my mother needed help after her knee replacement, I moved back to Tacoma thinking it would be a month. 1 month stretched like taffy into 6. I taught ceramics adjunct at Tacoma Community College 2 days a week, and did inventory for a thrift store on South 38th the other 3. In the evenings, I made soup and listened to my mother's spoon circle the rim of her mug while we watched Como News. She liked to keep the volume low, so I had to lean closer. The house looked the same as it did when I was 11. The glass rooster over the kitchen doorway, the crocheted curtains, the photograph of Mount Rainier framed in oak beside the refrigerator. It smelled like powdered lemon cleaner and old envelopes, that paper-dry scent of someone who saved every mailing label. My mother had a particular way of saying "we" that meant you. "We need to sort the basement this weekend, or we won't make it on 1 cart, we'll need 2. When I'd go downstairs to wedge my wheel between the Christmas boxes and the boxes labeled taxes. Keep, I'd feel the ceiling press down. I was always a large woman, tall and broad, strong from years of wedging clay, and in that house I felt both too big and too small, like a statue jammed into a birdcage. I had a chance to be an artist again. A gallery in Santa Fe, Hecho a Mano on Canyon Road, had accepted 3 of my ash-glazed vases for their spring show and asked if I could do a week of demonstrations at the artisans' market at the rail yard. The owner, a woman named Joni with silver hair and hands like mine, wrote, "If you can get here by April 10th, I'll set you up with a wheel and a cot, and we'll sell everything that isn't bolted to the floor." I'd cried over the email at the long wooden table in the dining room, careful not to drip on the keyboard. But to get there the way I wanted, to keep going farther, to throw my pieces in a kiln with new dirt and different sky, I needed to fly from Seattle to Boston first to see my daughter, Lena, who had just moved to Jamaica Plain for a city archives job, and then on to Reykjavík, where a friend's tiny collective offered a summer residency. I had saved for the one-way ticket, scraped from adjunct paychecks, and the sale of a large serving bowl to a couple in Ballard who came to my alley studio and paid in crisp bills. I told my mother I was going for 6 weeks. I did not tell her I was planning to stretch 6 into forever. I kept my documents in a red accordion binder with the snap broken, tucked behind the old microwave in the pantry. The day I went to pull the passport out, I slid my hand in and hit air. I did it twice, like the third pull might conjure paper from nothing, and then I pushed aside the taped-up recipe for mayonnaise cake and the basket of rubber bands and looked again. The binder rattled with bank statements and vaccination cards, but the blue book was gone. I called out, "Mom, have you seen my passport?" as if it might have decided to go sightseeing. She didn't answer right away. The rhythm of her spoon in the kitchen stopped, a silence I could draw in my mind. Then her voice floated down the hallway. "Why do you need to go so far? You want to go to Santa Fe? Drive, then. You always liked road trips." "Mom, where is it?" She appeared in the doorway in her mauve cardigan, small as a sparrow but with the stare of a hawk. "I put it somewhere safe," she said, as if she were doing me a favor. "You forget things, Jamie." My name in her mouth made me 12 again, the girl who did forget, lunchboxes, homework, the square dance permission slip. I stepped closer, my keys in my fist. "I'm leaving on Friday." You can leave on Saturday, she answered. She smiled, and if you didn't know her, you might have thought it was loving. If you leave at all. When I say humiliation, I mean the way my cheeks flamed like I'd been slapped in public. When I say betrayal, I mean my mother had taken the thing that said I belonged to a country, that I could leave and return, and claimed it. She turned back to the sink, lifted the passport from where she'd left it by the pepper grinder, and pinched it between her fingers. It's just a little book, she said, almost tender, and drew it to her chest. The next morning I checked everywhere. I checked the ironing board drawer where she kept the bills. I checked the baking tins full of quarters. I checked the trunk in the basement that still smelled like mothballs and that, when I lifted the lid, made my wrists itch with old wool. She'd taken it, and with that she had taken the week I'd plotted like a bank heist. The cheap flight to Boston with the 5 a.m. departure out of Seattle-Tacoma, the overnight at the Hilton at Logan Airport, where I planned to watch planes slice the night, the second day hop to Reykjavík with layover seat yoga and a thermos of tea. She'd even taken my imagining. I was 58 and I cried into a folded towel in the bathroom with the fan on so she wouldn't hear. It was not a tantrum, though. It was grief for the girl who had always asked permission. Standing there with my wet face, I understood two things. The first was that my mother believed she owned me more than she owned anything else in that house. The second was that no one was going to open the door for me. I had to learn the lock, pick it, and step out. Suspicion sharpened into discovery. At Safeway that afternoon, while she leaned on the cart and quizzed me on whether I'd written my aunt to thank her for the Christmas scarf again, she said, casual as clipping a coupon, "I told Pastor Ron you won't be leaving. The church needs you for the Easter lilies." She kept her eyes on the lemons, rolling each one like a marble in her palm. It was a test. She wanted to see if I'd swallow it, if I would raise my hands and say, "Okay, God, I am a plant to be potted here." I went along. "Sure, Mom," I said. "We'll do the lilies." My voice tasted like soap. I pushed the cart to the checkout, and while she fished for her loyalty card, I took a picture of her keys on my phone. The house key was brassy and heart-shaped, the one she liked to give to anyone she wanted to feel indebted. I remembered pressing that same key into my high school boyfriend's palm once, how he'd looked like a kid handed a badge. I wasn't going to hand it to anyone again. Villain's power is a funny thing when it hides inside sewing baskets and pot roast. My mother's power looked like kindness. She'd make a plate for the mail carrier, and then later ask if he thought I seemed off lately. She'd hand the altar guild a stack of napkins she bought at the thrift store and say, with a smile, "Jamie helped me pick them out, I just don't know what she'd do without me." She knew every cashier at the Walgreens by name. When my ex-husband forgot to send a check on time, she said on the phone where I could hear, "It's difficult for her, Matt. I keep her together." After, she made me tea. When I told my daughter on FaceTime what Mom had done, Lena ducked her head, brown hair falling over one eye. She was 27 and fierce. "That's domestic interference," she said. "It's coercive control, Mom." I laughed, but the sound came out like a cough. "What am I going to do, call the cops?" "Officer, my mom stole my passport in order to keep me as her live-in geranium." "You're going to make a plan," she said. "And you're going to stop telling her the plan." That night I went to my bedroom, the childhood one, with the floral wallpaper I'd once covered in posters of Janis Joplin, and I opened my laptop. I typed Seattle Passport Agency emergency appointment into the search bar. You can get a same-day passport if you're traveling within 14 days, so long as you have proof of travel. I had a confirmation for a Friday flight. I could change it. I could move the flight closer and give myself the reason the agency needed. I canceled my 5 a.m. Seattle-Tacoma flight with shaking hands and bought a new one for Thursday, pushing myself closer to the edge. Then I filled out a DS-64 report online to declare my passport lost. Lost. The word made something loosen in me. You can report a loss even if the book exists somewhere, just not to you. The agent at the downtown appointment, if I could get one, would ask questions. The agent would ask for ID. I had that. I'd need a photo. Bartels on 6th did passport photos. The idea assembled itself like a mug on a wheel. I knew what to do with clay. Now I'd wedge my fear until it turned plastic and useful. I slipped my phone under my pillow and called the agency at 6:59 a.m. The line opened at 7. I got a robot first, then a human who said, "Do you have proof of travel within the next 14 days?" I told her I had a Thursday flight. "I can put you in at 9:40 tomorrow morning," she said. "Bring all your documentation, and don't be late." I said, "Thank you," like she'd offered me oxygen. I spent that day rehearsing calm. I packed a tote with my birth certificate, social security card, driver's license, a W-2, the confirmation email for my new Thursday flight, a checkbook. I texted my friend Denise, a nurse at Virginia Mason who'd lived 3 decades under a mother like mine until she didn't, and asked if I could leave a small box at her place. "Spare will attachments and 2 vases," I said. "And a copy of my will." She replied with a heart and her building's entry code. At dinner, Mom told me we'd have to skip the lilies this year. She'd volunteered me to make 2 pans of funeral potatoes for the Palm Sunday luncheon instead. "You're so good at feeding people," she said fondly. "It's your calling." "I'll go to the store in the morning," I answered, just as fond, and swallowed the tremor that ran through me. That night I set my alarm, set a second, set a third. I dressed in jeans and a soft black sweater, hair in a tight bun, no jewelry. If she woke, I'd be going to Bartell's for photos. If she slept, I'd be driving to downtown Seattle across the little hump of I-705 and onto I-5, past the Big Silver. Welcome to Fife sign and the billboard for the Muckleshoot Casino, straight into a life where I did not ask permission to exist. At 6:15 a.m., I eased the front door open. The hall light was on. Mom slept light these days, dreams like brittle candy that shattered with any sound. Her bedroom door was ajar, and I had the ridiculous thought that she was a cat on the prowl, ears pricked for mice. The keys in my palm felt like teeth again. "Jamie," she said into the dark hall. "Where are you going this early?" "For potatoes," I said. "Come sit a minute." Her voice had that velvet sandpaper tone that meant she'd already decided something for me. "I want to show you something." In the kitchen, the window over the sink was a pane of flat gray. Rain stitched the glass. Mom had the kettle on, and beside it lay my passport face down, blue back like a bruised sky. She picked it up and weighed it in her palm like a bar of soap. "I had a bad dream," she said. "You were drowning in the Sound." I woke in a sweat. God told me it was a warning. "Mom," I began, but she raised one finger like a crossing guard. "You take this," she said finally, and slid the passport toward me. "When you can promise me you won't leave me behind." She expected me to weep and say, "Of course I won't. How could you think it?" She expected me to play the old role. But my plan had already changed the chemistry of the air. I looked at the passport, then at the kettle, then at the keys in my hand, and I smiled in a way that felt brand new in my mouth. "I can't promise that," I said. Her hand recoiled, and the passport went back into the drawer beside the pepper packets with a snap. "Then you can't have it," she said, voice tight. "Not until you're reasonable." I picked up my tote. "Then I guess I'll be late with the potatoes." I left her there with the kettle squealing. By the time she called my name again, I was at the car, engine rolling, rain bouncing off the windshield like small hands. The Seattle Passport Agency sits behind a thick door in a federal building downtown, and the air inside feels like shade even when you step in from rain. The waiting room had that federal beige, a low hum of quiet crisis. People far from planes, people whose emergencies had tidy steps, and people whose emergencies did not. When they called my number, I walked up to a woman with copper lipstick and a blazer so sharply pressed it could slice bread. I handed her the DS-64, the birth certificate, the driver's license, the printed itinerary with the Thursday flight time circled. My hands didn't shake. "Not then." "Reason for travel?" she asked. "I'm visiting my daughter in Boston," I said. "Then continuing abroad for work." She nodded, tapped. "Any previous passport lost or stolen?" "Reported lost," I answered. I kept my eyes on the jumping red line of the wall clock. The woman looked up at me for a long moment. She could smell a story. But she did not ask. She slid a pen toward me. Sign here to invalidate the previous book. I signed. My mother's control loosened with the ink. My name was no longer tied to the blue book that lived in her house. It was a name written in this room under this light with this witness. Return at 1, the woman said. Don't be late. I went outside into the rain like baptism. I walked to Cherry Street Coffee and bought a paper cup that warmed my fingers. In the glass of the window I saw myself, big older, hair streaked white like an early winter field. I looked like a woman who could lift something heavy and set it down gently where it belonged. I sent Denise a text. After today, I wrote, I'm not coming back to the house. She replied, I'll be at my place after 3. The couch is yours. When I returned at 1, there it was, a new blue book. The woman passed it under the glass like a secret. Safe travels, she said. I tucked it into the inside pocket of my tote and felt my breath change, deeper, slower. My phone trembled in my hand then, 3 missed calls from Mom, a text that said, Where did you go? And another, the police asked me if I knew where you were. I told them I didn't. It was a lie. She hadn't called the police. It was a scare tactic, a ghost story for grown daughters told by porch light. I took the elevator down, and when the door opened into the lobby, my mother was there in her mauve cardigan, hair done, lipstick exact. She had taken the bus from Tacoma, a 2-hour ride each way, to perform concern. When she saw me, she folded her arms and put on the face she wore for casserole deliveries. Jamie, she said brightly, what are you doing here? I lifted my tote onto my shoulder and smiled in that new way again, the one that felt like clicking into place. What I should have done a long time ago, I said, and we stared at each other in the quiet, the elevators dinging behind us, the city moving past on the other side of the glass, not caring who won. She took 1 step toward me like she might reach to grip my elbow and guide me home, and my body remembered the small humiliations, the spoon circling, the we that meant you. The blue book pinched like a bar of soap, and I understood I was done. Let's go, she said, gentle. We'll make the lilies. I already bought a ticket, I said. To Boston? She tried, hopeful, making it sound like a compromise. To not here, I said, and walked past her into the rain, which felt like applause on my cheeks. I did not look back to see her face, because I knew it by heart. The villain's power dissolves quickest when you stop offering your eyes as a mirror. But I knew she would pivot, as always, to the audience she could still keep. She would tell Pastor Ron a new version by Sunday, make the Walgreens cashier cluck her tongue, say to my aunt on the phone that she had done all she could, that her daughter was an ingrate, that evil had its way with good people every day. She would gather sympathy like buttons. I would let her. I had something better than an answer. A door. I drove to Denise's place in Capitol Hill. She lives near the Elliott Bay Book Company, in one of those old buildings that creak like polite old men. I parked in a loading zone and hauled the box with my wheel attachments and the bag with 2 vases. When I set them down inside her door, I felt the weight leave my hands and move to my chest, which is to say, it turned into breath. You can stay as long as you need, she said. I have a kettle and a couch. Both are yours. We ate pho on her floor and made a list. Step 1, Seattle-Tacoma tomorrow morning, I said. Step 2, Boston for 2 nights. Step 3, Iceland. She grinned, and the grin reached my feet like warmth. From her window, the hills sloped down to Broadway, people carrying umbrellas like planets. Someone practiced trumpet in a nearby apartment, soft scales like a person learning to speak. I had not yet told my mother I was leaving for good. Part of revenge is not the telling. It's the keeping of your own counsel until the proof is done. I set my phone to do not disturb, then typed an email to my aunt, to my cousin, to Pastor Ron, to the Walgreens cashier. I found her address in a picture on the church Facebook page where everyone wore matching t-shirts for a service day. I explained what had happened. I kept it simple. My mother withheld my passport to keep me from traveling, and then lied about calling the police. I wrote, I am safe and leaving the state. Please don't enable her by pretending this is love. I attached a recording, a short one, from that morning in the kitchen where she'd said, You take this when you can promise you won't leave me behind. I hadn't planned to record it. I had pressed the button as I'd set down my tote for the potatoes, a reflex born from the summer I spent with a man who liked to change the story after the fact. The audio was clear as a bell. I scheduled the email to send the next morning at 7:05 a.m., just after TSA opened the pre-check line at SeaTac North Security Checkpoint, when I would be through the scanners, shoes tied, phone on airplane mode. I bought a one-way to Boston and a one-way from Boston to Reykjavík. I paid with the money from the serving bowl and from the vases, and with the unglamorous $10 bills I had tucked into a clay jar labeled trips like a kid planning a runaway. When the confirmation email landed, my hands shook again, but they shook like after a sprint. At 10 p.m., I drove back to Tacoma to do one last thing. The house was dark except for the night light in the hall, a soft square that made the carpet glow. My mother's door was closed. I could hear her breath, steady, childlike. I stood outside her room for a long minute and thought about the times she'd brushed my hair when I was small, careful not to catch on tangles, the way she'd taught me to fold towels so they stacked like books. Love is not a simple word. It is not an excuse. It is a garment you can outgrow and still keep in a drawer for the shape of it. In the kitchen, I set my set of keys on the table. House, garage, shed, the heart-shaped one I'd carried on a ring since high school. They made a small, bright sound. I wrote a note on a pad that said meals in cheerful letters. I'm going, Mom. There are casseroles in the freezer, and I left checks for the gardener. Don't call me. We will speak when I'm ready. I felt cruel, and then I felt free, and then I felt nothing, and then I felt everything, the way waves overlap. I walked to the pantry and slid open the drawer where she'd hidden the passport. It was there, odorous with pepper, a dead book now that I'd invalidated it. I left it where it lay. Let it sit under the pepper like a small blue lie. I checked the time. 10:43. If I drove to Seattle-Tacoma now, I could sleep in the parking garage and be first in line. I took one last look at the house, the rooster over the doorway, the couch with its knit afghan, the piano with the hymn book open to blessed assurance. I whispered goodbye, house, because only I would ever hear it. I shut the door softly and stepped into the cool night with no keys at all. When I woke in the driver's seat, neck stiff, hair a white bramble, the garage lights made every car look like a ship in fog. I grabbed my tote, my small suitcase, and walked the skybridge into the terminal. Seattle-Tacoma at 5 a.m. is a city of its own. A lullaby of rolling suitcases, the smell of coffee and raincoats, people in shorts and sandals because somewhere else is always warmer. I passed the Sub Pop store with its racks of t-shirts and the big windows that catch planes like silver fish, and for a second, I was giddy. I was 58 and giddy like a teenager with a driver's license. At the North Security Checkpoint, a TSA agent smiled at my new passport and said, "Fresh off the press, huh?" I nodded. My chest surged with something like laughter, or like the first breath after holding your head under water to see how long you could stand it. I didn't check my phone. I didn't want her voice coming through the wire to make the terminal narrow again. At the gate, I bought a coffee and a bagel and watched the sky lighten to that pearl gray that makes Mount Rainier look like it's been smudged with an eraser. Boarding started, the early calls for people who need extra time, for families with children, for those with group 1 and 2 and the rest. I waited, steady. When I took my seat, window always, I pressed my forehead to the glass and thought of clay. Of centering a heavy lump and making it obey gravity and your hands at the same time, pulling it up into a cylinder that could become anything. The plane pushed back. I kept my eyes on the runway. My phone buzzed once and then went quiet. The emails would be landing like sparrows, to my aunt who would call my mother and say, "Mary, you can't do that." To Pastor Ron, who would sit with his coffee and decide if his sermon on Sunday would mention freedom. To the Walgreens cashier, who would blink and then shrug and then say to my mother at the counter, "We're out of your lipstick shade today." The story would stop being hers to tell. We lifted into the cloud's belly, that brief moment when your stomach drops and the earth lets go, and I closed my eyes. In Boston, Lena would meet me at the Silver Line stop at Courthouse Station with a thermos and hug me like a survivor. We would walk to her apartment above the bakery that sells cardamom buns and sit on the floor and plan next steps. New phone number, new P.O. box, a file at the King County Courthouse for a protection order if my mother turned to threats. I would write to the gallery in Santa Fe and say, "I'm delayed but I'm coming." I would write to the residency in Reykjavík and say, "Keep the cot open." My revenge was not going to be loud. It was going to be administrative, blessedly bureaucratic, a ladder built from checklists and hard stops. But there was theater left in it yet. When the wheels touched down in Boston with that upsurge, everyone claps for now, and then I turned on my phone. A flood. 6 voicemails, 3 from my mother, 2 from my aunt, 1 from an unknown Tacoma number. The emails I had scheduled had already started their work. Above the stack was a new message from Lena with a subject line that read simply, "Welcome to the rest of your life." I exhaled a laugh that made the man in the aisle seat glance over. "First time in Boston?" he asked. "First time like this," I said, and as we taxied, my screen lit with one more text from my mother, sent an hour ago. "I hope you're happy." The period at the end was the same one she used for grocery lists. I typed back because I am not cruel, and because every ending wants the clean line that makes sense only after you draw it. "I will be," I wrote. "You can be too." And then I blocked her number for now, a thin new wall where the drafts of her voice couldn't reach. On the silver line, my suitcase rattled like a dog's tail against my ankle. At Courthouse Station, Lena was all arms and hair and heat, and for a second I let myself be the daughter protected. The air outside was damp and smelled like salt and exhaust. We walked to her apartment, up 3 flights with a landing where someone had left a plant leaking dirt like a small crime, and I put my tote on her counter and took out the new blue book that made my mother's blue book into a dead moth. We made tea. We didn't talk about Tacoma right away. We talked about the museum where she worked and the kid who had asked where they kept the oldest paper, like it might crumble if you breathed too close. We talked about the gallery in Santa Fe and whether I should still go and how to make arrangements through Albuquerque because the flight was cheaper. After tea, I called the King County Clerk's office and asked about filing a harassment protection order. The woman on the line said, "You'll need to show a pattern," and I opened the Notes app and began assembling the pattern. The withheld passport, the lie about the police, the repeated attempts to interfere with my work. I uploaded the audio clip. I collected the texts. I wrote down the dates. Paper is a kiln. You can make it hold heat and shape. That night, under Lena's crocheted blanket, I thought of my mother's face in the Federal Building lobby and how it had briefly crumpled when I said, "Not here." The way a dress looks wrong on the hanger you always used for it. I let myself feel the grief then, not for what had been done to me, but for who we would never be together. I cried quietly because she had brushed my hair once, because she had taught me the fold for towels, because love and harm can share a pantry drawer, tucked beside the pepper packets, each in small, similar envelopes. The next morning, we took the tea to Logan. At the Icelandair counter, the woman behind the desk smiled at my passport like it was a magic trick. "You're going far," she said. "I'm going home," I said, and surprised myself by meaning it, even if the home was not a place I'd been yet. Lena hugged me hard at the rope that separates the travelers from the watchers. "Text me when you land," she said, and then, fierce again, "And if she shows up at your gate someday, let security walk her back to the curb. This is your life." On the plane, I thought about my ceramic teacher at the Pratt Fine Arts Center in Seattle, a woman named Ari with silver hoops who used to say, "Pull slow, or the cylinder will collapse." I pulled slow. I made lists. At Keflavik, I watched the sun strike the runway like a coin. In Reykjavík, the residency was a narrow room with a skylight that turned the rain into a harp. The wheel was secondhand and groaned like an old dog, and when I set my hands to clay, the world went quiet except for the hum that has always lived in the palms of my hands. The first piece collapsed, then the second, and then the third stood up straight like someone who'd finally heard her name in a crowd and knew she should answer. The emails did their work. My aunt sent a message with the subject, "Oh Mary," and another that said, "I love you, but you can't do that." Pastor Ron wrote me asking if we could talk, his language careful and kind, the way men get when they don't know how to hold two truths at once. The Walgreens cashier did not, as predicted, reply, but she did switch my mother's lipstick for a different brand. My mother left a final voicemail on the number I would eventually erase, her voice low. "You've made a fool of me." It was always the worst thing in her world. To be alone with herself without an audience to applaud the casseroles and the lipstick. "I hope," she added, and then stopped. She hung up without finishing the sentence. I decided later that the missing word was you. Revenge is supposed to be a spectacle, an explosion. Mine was a trail of paper and a train of flights, and the clink of keys on a table at midnight, and a blue book slid under glass. But there was a coda. Joni at Hecho Amano posted a photo of one of my vases on Instagram. A tall, ash-glazed thing with a neck like a singer and a run of glaze down one side like rain on warm stone. The caption said, "By the inimitable Jamie Clark, who left some things behind to come find us." My mother does not have Instagram, but my aunt does, and within an hour my aunt had written a comment with 2 red hearts. Within 2 hours, my cousin had shared it to Facebook, and within 3, someone from the church had sent it to the church's private group, and then a friend texted me a screenshot. Under the picture of my vase, my mother had written, "So proud of my daughter." The pronoun like a flag planted in a country she no longer governed. I wrote back privately. "You can be proud," I said. "You just can't hold my passport again." Her response was a picture of the empty drawer with the pepper packets pushed to the side like snow. The blue book, her blue book, was gone. She had thrown it away or tucked it into a Bible to make a point to nobody at all. "I don't know how to be with you now," she wrote. It was the closest to a confession she'd ever make. I didn't answer right away. I went downstairs to the studio where a woman from Poland was trimming bowls, and I asked if she had any spare wax resist. She did. I painted the bottoms of my new pieces, held them up to the skylight, and watched the light spill through the clay like milk. When I did reply, it was a small message that contained our future. "We can be 2 women who like each other when we can," I wrote. "And when we can't, we'll be quiet. Silence, it turns out, can be a kindness." In it, I built a life. Santa Fe was not lost, it was delayed. I flew from Iceland to New Mexico in June, landed in heat that smelled like sunburn and pinyon, and met Joni in a dress that looked like a paint-splattered apron torn into something pretty. I threw at the market, and tourists stood with their hands folded and asked how long it took to learn to make a vase. 58 years, I said, and we all laughed because it sounded like a joke and wasn't. I rented a tiny casita off Agua Fria with a courtyard where a cat slept like a police siren that had forgotten its job. At night, I wrote letters to Lena and pictures to myself of the girl in Tacoma who had cried into a towel and told her, "Look, look." There was one more legal piece, a final rung on the ladder. Back in Washington, after a month, my petition for a civil protection order went before a commissioner in a courtroom with wood paneling like a high school stage set. I flew up from Santa Fe for it, wore a dress that made me feel like I took up the right amount of space. My mother did not appear. The paperwork did. The court stamped a piece of paper that said, in effect, "Do not interfere." It's not a shield against hurt, but it is a signpost on a road where there were none before. I put a copy in my tote behind my new passport. I walked out of the courthouse into the Seattle light that turns every window into a lake and called Denise, and we went to Pike Place and split a strawberry croissant over a trash can because the benches were full, and we laughed with our mouths full like little kids because sometimes winning looks like powdered sugar on the front of your black sweater. I didn't send my mother a copy of the order. I didn't need to. The revenge had already landed where it needed to. In the world where I moved without needing her permission, where her blue book was a dead thing and mine was a living one, where her stories about me were just stories and not geography. I had bought one-way tickets. I had left the keys on the table. I had written my name where it could not be erased. Months later, in Reykjavík again for a fall show, I stood on the harbor wall and watched the water slap the stones, hard and purposeful, no malice in it, just force meeting shape. A tourist beside me asked if it was always this gray. "Sometimes it's blue," I said, and we both smiled at how ordinary and profound that was. I checked my phone, and there was a photo from Lena of a hand-thrown bowl in her kitchen with 2 apples in it, and beneath it, a caption, "Look what survived everything." I saved the picture and put my phone in my pocket, and felt the weight of it against my thigh like an anchor and a rocket both. The sky stayed gray for a while, and then the sun broke through in a strip like gold leaf. And it was not a sign because I didn't need signs anymore. It was just light on water. I stood there until my fingers felt the cold, and then went inside, back to the studio, where the clay waited with the patience that comes only from earth and time and hands that have decided. The house in Tacoma still stands, rooster over the kitchen door, nightlight glowing a square on the carpet. I imagine sometimes my mother at the sink, kettle heating, spoon circling. I imagine the drawer where the pepper packets live, the empty space where a blue book used to be. We talk sometimes now, politely. She tells me about lilies and napkins in Walgreens. I tell her about glazed temperatures and shipping costs, and a cat who sleeps like a siren. We are 2 women who like each other when we can, and when we can't, we are quiet. I never asked for the old keys back. I bought new locks for a new life, and learned their clicks by heart. And when strangers ask how I did it, how I pulled slow until the cylinder stood, how I walked into an airport at dawn with my name tucked against my ribs and did not look back, I tell them the most ordinary truth. I reported the book lost. I stood in a federal building at 1 o'clock. I took the new book like a small, blue, beating thing. I bought a one-way ticket. I left the keys behind. And the line that still comes to me when the studio is quiet, and the kiln is cooling, and the city is a bird with its wings folded for the night, is not a threat, not a boast, not a hymn. It is the softest sentence I have. I am gone, and I am still here. The end.